go wrong? Exactly. Sounds perfect. What could go wrong? Okay. Phone's very away. Very away. Really very away. So I know that you're probably under the impression that we're going to do our second debate today, but actually thinking it out for a little while, I think what I'd rather do is attack the documents that went along with yesterday's discussion and start filling out a chart. So I have 3 slides to go over with you. Then we'll attack 2 of the documents that have to do with the Sedition Act. We'll fill out a little chart here, which I think you'll find pretty helpful. And then you'll be armed and ready to write that formative 2-paragraph practice blue book essay part, and then you should have a decent chunk of time in class today to finish up your paper, start working on your blue book essay paragraph, the 2 paragraphs that have to do with government attempts to limit what they consider to be dangerous speech, as exemplified by this thing called the Sedition Act, which was passed in the 1790s. And then you are, of course, free to synthesize. In fact, you should synthesize because it's full of, American history is full of examples when the U.S. government attempted to squash what they considered dangerous speech, and it seems to go against the First Amendment, but maybe there's a good reason it goes to the First Amendment, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So here we go, three slides, and we're off. So this would be the first election after Washington's done, right? Washington has served his 2 terms. He steps down, and now what? Now what? Okay. So that would mean the previous election was 1792.
Sorry for the interruption. Joe Conwell Leonard to the office, please. Joe Conwell Leonard to the office.
Who's that?
Joe.
Oh, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. All right. So the previous election would be 1792. That would be the election where Washington was reelected, which would mean the previous election would seem to be 1788, but it wasn't. It was 1789, the only election in U.S. presidential history in an odd year, and that's because immediately he started serving his term, right? There was no one to replace, so he immediately served his term. Okay, so let's just take a look at this. We have 2 candidates. We have something named J. Adams. Interestingly, not Hamilton. Hamilton, I've been telling you, is the father of the Federalist Party, and yet it was not Hamilton that ran for president.
Why didn't you run?
Right, and I'm just wondering if anyone knows. Where was Hamilton born?
Not years.
Well, technically, nobody at this time was born in the United States because the U.S. wasn't a nation. We were British colonies. He was born in Jamaica. He was born of a wealthy family in Jamaica, and so there was a bit of a question of could he even run for president? And of course, his argument was, well, nobody was born in the U.S. because the U.S. wasn't a thing, but he wasn't even born in America, and so it was a little gray. Anyway. Take that back. Unsay what you said.
Which means America was just being seen as a nation at this time.
Right. Yeah, I'll agree with that.
So only the soldiers could be president, or could the Indians be president? Oh my God, yeah, wait, could an Indian be president?
No. Indians are not human.
Okay, they are though.
Right. Remember, yeah, another video destroyed. The Constitution did not define Indians as citizens, right? So clearly Indians were not eligible. The most of the men who were elected president, in fact, all of them, were born in, frankly, Virginia or New York. Hamilton was born in Jamaica, so it wasn't even a colony, right? Yes.
But if we're really thinking, slaves should be able to be president then, because they were actually born here, because they were
weren't considered citizens.
They weren't considered citizens. They were considered chattel property.
They're more like.
Yes, I know, gee whiz, it should have been that way, but it wasn't. Okay. you'll notice that a pretty close election, right? The Electoral College was 71 to 68. John Adams is elected president, but here's where it gets a little funky, and here's where the Constitution reveals its flaws. Yes, I said it. The Constitution is a flawed document, and that's why right in the Constitution are the first aid kits to fix the Constitution, because the winner becomes president and the second place person becomes vice president. Can you imagine if that were true today? It would be President Trump and Vice President Hillary Clinton.
Oh, dear Lord.
And that would be bad, right? That would be bad. Okay.
I like the
We have a Federalist, hooray for government, and a Democratic Republican, boo hiss for federal government. And they are president and vice president. This is not going to go well. So they will fix it. They will fix it. They create an amendment, the 12th Amendment, which says, okay, we messed up. What we should do from now on after this election is you vote for a ticket. You vote for a president and a vice president together. So problem solved.
Does the
Right?
person that's running for president get to choose who their vice president is?
Yes. Generally, that's true. Yep.
So
You
the vice-
pick your
Oh
candidate.
my God, that's cool.
So in the next presidential election, it'll likely be Trump with Pence again. And then whoever the Democratic nominee is will hand pick, probably based on, well, what state is this person from? It's a battleground state.
Oh, they
So if
have
we
given
choose
a
this
list?
person, we'll win that state, sort of.
Are they given a list of these are the people you can pick them for your vice president?
Kind of, yeah.
Oh, so if I.
I mean, they can't
for
pick their
president,
best
I could
friend.
Just pick Addie?
All right, so just know Adams is the president, Jefferson is the vice president. It was under, yeah, go ahead.
Can I pick myself as my own vice president? Can I serve as both? Is there anything that says I can't?
Yes, the
Really?
Constitution.
But we can change the Constitution. We can change it. We can have it.
Change the Constitution. Godspeed. It was under the presidency of John Adams. John Adams, the same guy, by the way, that defended those British. No, we figured out it wasn't him, was it? No, it was John Adams. John Adams, the same guy who defended the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre. That's him. That the Federalists passed two laws. One's called the Alien Act. This gave the president a lot of authority to remove any person from the nation before they became a citizen for any reason. It was phrased in terms of national threat. Okay, and then if you're a foreigner, you move to the United States. How long before you can become a citizen? It was raised to 14 years. Now, just to put that in context, how long is it today? You move here and you live here for a number of years. How long do you have to be living in the U.S. before you can apply for citizenship? It is 5 years. Very good. So it's 5 years. 14 years is longer than 5 years. It's a long time. Put these two things together, and what it means is the president can remove any foreigner for 14 years.
Okay, but technically we were all foreigners because we all came over from.
I didn't, did you?
Well, they could. Because
Well, no.
they were.
That's not true.
But they all-
Adams was born in Virginia. Yes.
This sounds really stupid, but how would you make it for 14 years here? Without
Well, you would get a what's called a visa. Right? You'd get permission to stay. You're not a citizen though. You can't vote.
You get married before you're visa up or whatever.
Yeah, they'll take that into consideration. Sure. Yep.
With this law now, the British are hanging out in those sports, they can
It's true.
say, get out.
Well, they have been saying get out.
Yeah, now they're like, get out.
Now we really mean it. Okay.
Technically, the British weren't important.
Okay. So this gives the president a lot of power, and of course, the fear is that the president will simply kick out people that he thinks wouldn't vote for him, right? That he's going to use it as a political tool rather than a security tool, and so it's seen as sort of an abusive grab of power by the Democratic Republicans, the party that opposed it. And then something that we've talked about before, the Sedition Act, which I think we'll all agree, outlawed lying. I think most of us would be okay with that, right? You can't just lie about other people That's not speech. That's not free speech. That's just lying. That's called libel, right? The newspaper cannot simply publish a full article on you and listing all your criminal activities if it's not true. Okay? The other one is a little bit gray. This is where it gets a little bit gray, right? Let's say that there's some angry person and he's sick of Trump, and so he writes a letter to the editor and he says, that Trump, he's nothing but trouble. We got to do something about that guy. That's all it says. And so somebody else reads the newspaper and says, yeah, we should do something about that guy. Come on, Bessie. Bessie's his donkey. And so he grabs his donkey and his pitchfork and he walks all the way to Washington, D.C. It's a pilgrimage. And he walks on it and he meets Donald Trump. He says, Donald Trump, this is for you. Come on, Bessie. Ah! God! Are you getting the visual? I'm off camera. And he walks home with Bessie. All right. He just murdered the president. Clearly, he's going to be arrested. The question I have is, will the writer of the article get arrested? He said we should do something about that guy. Somebody else read it, did something criminal. But should the writer of the article be in trouble? This law said, yes, his speech led to violence. This is where it gets a little gray, though, because he didn't say you should grab a pitchfork and murder the president by impaling him and then standing the pitchfork on its thin and then pushing his dead carcass on. He didn't say anything. He just said we should do something. He could argue in short. All I meant was we should vote him out of office or we should impeach the guy. I didn't say murder the guy, but still, somebody read his speech and then engaged in violent activity. This law outlawed that speech. Okay? And that's why the Democratic Republicans said, this seems like it could be abused. Here are their arguments. Violates the First Amendment, free speech. And yet, here's something sort of interesting. The Democratic Republicans felt that they could not simply violate the law, a la Rosa. You can't just violate the law and then go to court, right? That's the idea that exists. It's called civil disobedience, right? If you think there's a dumb law, break it on purpose, go to court, and convince a jury, yeah, I broke the law, it's a stupid law. The reason Jefferson, the leader of the Democratic Republican Party, the reason he felt that this was a bad strategy is because who names judges? Who names judges? President. The first president was George Washington, who named a lot of judges who ended up being Federalists. The second president was John Adams, a Federalist. In other words, all the judges, all the people who would rule on whether or not this law was constitutional were from the party that made the law. So Jefferson felt they're going to rule that the law is perfectly constitutional, so we can't go that way. Is there something else we can do? Is there something else? And I know what to do. I will go from state to state, and I will tell each state, pass your own law nullifying the Sedition Act. And 2 states bit. 2 states said, sounds good. Kentucky and Virginia. Both of those states said, not here, not within our border. Now, can states do that? Can a state do that? Today, I'm asking you, could Wisconsin pass a law saying we're not going along with the national speed limit? We're going to make our own speed limit 90.
Isn't it like a thing where isn't there a thing where it's like you get paid for obeying the laws? Like if Wisconsin were to change their speed limit, we'd get less funding or something like that.
Okay, but like some states,
Yes.
like marijuana is like legal, but like it's not legal in other states because like that's
Very good. So we seem to have an example, marijuana, perfect example, where it's illegal in the nation, and yet Colorado says, not here. So we seem to have an example where a state today is nullifying a federal law. So it would seem that the answer to my question is yes, states can nullify federal laws.
But what if the
It
highway-
would seem that this is perfectly acceptable.
But what if the highway goes?
It
to
would
two
seem.
states?
Well, that's where the law, you do know that as you go on freeways, if you enter a new state, the speed limit changes.
Really?
Have you ever been through Nebraska?
Yeah. I didn't know that.
Slow. Yes.
Well, how does it work for like Washington DC, because marijuana is legal there too?
The same way it works in Colorado.
But
Because they all voted that it was legal, but
It's
they're
not
a
a state.
district. So like in that
Would
district,
they abide by like the same rules as the state would?
Sometimes.
they can do whatever they want. for the president.
No, they can't do it every day. So it seems like Kentucky and Virginia are nullifying a federal law. And of course, the question pops up, can you do that? And to whom do they go to answer that question? Where do they go? Right? They're playing a football game and somebody just committed a penalty, or is it a penalty? I don't know. Where do we go? There's no referee. There's no referee yet. Unfortunately, before they could answer the question on the constitutionality, both laws, did you know that laws have expiration dates? They have to be renewed every year, usually. Neither law was renewed, so they simply died off. So they could not answer the question about the constitutionality of these two laws because both laws ended, just because they ran out of time. But we're not done talking about these things. This is our last slide for today. So here we go. The next election. Remember now, they fixed the problem. The first place person, president, second place person, vice president is no longer the case. Now they run as a ticket. Okay? Let me know as soon as you see the flaw, the major flaw. They thought they fixed it, and they didn't. Okay? So it's a rematch, right? Jefferson against Adams again. And you'll see that Jefferson and whoever his running mate is have just defeated Adams and whoever Adams' running mate is. See the flaw yet? Anyone see it? No, not yet. All right. This is the electoral vote. 73 votes for Team Blue. That's Jefferson/partner. Does anyone happen to know, by the way, who was the vice presidential candidate? By the way, that's the flaw. Okay. It's Jefferson with a guy by the name of Aaron Burr. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah.
Aaron Burr? Okay, good. All right, very good. Jefferson with a guy by the name of Aaron Burr defeats Adams, and I frankly don't even know who Adams' running mate was. All right, so congratulations, Jefferson Burr ticket.
Who's president?
Which one of you is the president? See the flaw yet?
Yeah.
It did not clarify which one was which. It simply said you two. Now, when Jefferson and Burr win the Electoral College, Jefferson says, well, it's clearly me. I was the person, right, Aaron? And Aaron said, no, I want to be president. So what you had was a tie, a perfect tie. Jefferson tied Burr. Even though they were a ticket, it did not clarify which one was the president and which one was the vice president, which means they tied. They tied in the electoral college. They tied in the popular vote. It was a perfect tie. Never before or since have we had a perfect tie in the presidential election, right? Does anyone know? Does anyone happen to know? When there is a tie, who decides the election? That's right. The House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, each state gets one vote. No matter how large or small your state is, each state gets one vote. Here's a delicious little irony about the Congress at the time. Jefferson and Burr were Democratic Republicans, but Congress was controlled by the Federalists. So it was the Federalists who got to pick between Jefferson and Burr, the Democrat Republicans. And remember, the Federalists are controlled by a guy by the name of Hamilton. So Jefferson is depending on his foe, Hamilton, to name him or Burr as president because Hamilton is the leader of the Federalists, even though he's not a congressman, but he's got pull. And so he's sort of the kingmaker, right? He's the man behind the curtain, if you get the Wizard of Oz metaphor. Right? And here's where it ends up coming to fruition. Hamilton advised Federalists, go for Jefferson, because Burr is nuts. Okay? Right. So Jefferson wins. Burr's enraged, challenges Hamilton to a duel.
And Hamilton loses.
Right? 10 paces turn on fire, which was illegal in New York. So they crossed the bay and did it in New Jersey. Okay. And at the time, duels were illegal, but it's sort of like speeding. You could, you did it, right?
As long as you don't get caught.
As long as you don't get caught. But what you would do is you would take your 10 paces, turn around, and fire into the ground. There, honor has been served, right? You don't actually shoot at each other. So here they go. One morning in New Jersey, they take their 10 paces. Aaron Burr is over here. Hamilton is over there. This is the Secretary of the Treasury. Is over here, turns around, fires into the ground. He's done. And here's Aaron Burr, who says, points right at him and shoots and kills him. In a duel in New Jersey. Hamilton is killed in it. It's insane to think about that. Now, remember, it was illegal. He had just committed murder of the Secretary of the Treasury. So Burr fled. And this is not the end of the story. He fled to Europe.
But then who's the vice president?
Yeah, they named another vice president, right? I don't
For a
know.
little while there, Jefferson was both.
Well, no, you're not both.
But he was.
They're what? No, the president is not the vice president. They.
But they didn't know where Burr was.
You were
He
fired
committed
up there.
murder, so for like a little bit there, Jefferson
Okay, fine. He was both. Okay. Burr fled to Europe, and then what he did was he developed a relationship with France. It's crazy. And Burr had a plan to create New France, right here. You and I call it Louisiana Territory, where he would be the ruler, and New France would expand westward and become a competitor. And it didn't take the French long to think this guy is crazy. And he ended up living in Canada. And actually, at the end of his life, he was perceived to be kind of a good guy because he freed Native Americans. He became a ruler of some, I don't know, mayor of something. But kind of crazy. Down here is why people voted for or against. People voted against the Federalists and as a result Adams because they didn't really like the Alien and Sedition Acts. They thought it was a limit on freedom, liberty, that sort of thing. Jefferson was also sort of seen as not the greatest candidate ever because Jefferson openly advocated for separation of church and state, that religion should have no place in government, which is a fairly unusual position to take. I mean, you hear candidates all the time talking about their faith, and there's nothing wrong with that. But here you have a guy that says, no, faith has no place in government, and yet he wins. So it's fairly impressive. Impressive in a wow, you won the election with that strategy sort of way. Okay, so now Jefferson's president. We'll talk about what he does with his presidency next week. Very good. Any questions? Go ahead.
When was it like, were there cowboys at this time?
The Cowboys at this time.
Wasn't there a point where there was like people that were trying to live in gangs and rent horses and robbing places, and then people were trying to stop them and become more modern and
Cowboys are simply people who take the herd from here to here so they can be put on choo-choo trains and go back out east. And no, that age has not really hit yet. We need trains first. Okay. You are now going to take a little break and retrieve your documents. And I want you to create somewhere this. It's 9 columns. 9 columns with headings. This is going to be sort of your cheat sheet for documents. Let's get through 2 today, and then we'll call it a day.
The dueling thing just sounded like a cowboy.
Yeah, in a way. We'll start when the big hand is right on the 11, so you got about 2 minutes. Stand, stretch, do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups. Retrieving your documents, making this. So retrieve this and make that.
Butter, where do you want this?
One dance.
Well, I can try, but my handwriting's not very well. That's okay. I don't know how to do it. I need a ruler. Oh, yeah, that's right. Go.
So just a little rule of thumb, if you need 9 columns, you draw 8 lines.
Wow.
If you need 2 columns, you draw 1 line. Number of columns equals number of lines plus 1. There's a mathematical formula. If you need 3 columns, you draw 2 lines. Drawing 2 lines creates 3 columns. If you need 5 columns, you draw 4 lines. 4 plus 1 is 5. So number of columns equals number of lines plus 1. My goal is to get through documents 3 and 4. I am relying on those of you who were assigned documents 3 and 4. Right? That might be you. Okay. So let's yep, it's time. So let's turn to documents 3 and 4, and let's see what we can fill out here. So I don't need hands here. If you were assigned document 3, here we go. So which document is it? 3. Who's our speaker? John Allen. Notice it is not Hamilton. It's John Allen. John Allen. It's right here. John Allen. Who's John Allen? From what party? He's a Federalist. Okay, that's the important part. He is a Federalist. Okay. Credibility. Right? Credibility. Okay. What is the issue? It's okay if you don't get this right. But what are they arguing about? The Sedition Act is the actual evidence. What's the issue? Very good. Attempt to limit speech is the issue. That's the issue. The Sedition Act is the specific historical example of that issue. Okay, so the issue is attempts to limit speech. Okay, the document evidence. This is the part where I'm looking to those of you who were assigned document 3. What does Alan say? Why don't we skip that for a second here and skip it. Well, historical evidence is the Sedition Act. We'll come back to document evidence here for a second. The historical evidence is the Sedition Act. This was the actual law created by the Federalists, which attempted to limit speech. We covered it today. What types of speech? 2 types. Lying?
And writing that could lead to violence.
Very good. Speech that could lead to violence. That's the gray part. That's the one where it's like, ugh. Okay? And we'll try and figure out why. So, do you have Sedition Act? And maybe a little bit of clarification. What did it do specifically? Okay, or you could refer to your notes. I would say that there's a second piece of historical evidence necessary, and that is what's going on in France at this time?
Revolution.
French Revolution, chaos, guillotines, 60,000 people losing their head. Why? Because people were voicing their opinion that the king needed to go, and chaos. So I would suggest that you have Sedition Act and French Revolution.
Is it true that the French still use guillotines up until 1977?
1952 was the last official. Okay, right here I have a column called happy face or sad face. In other words,
Yay or nay?
yes or no to the attempt to limit speech. Did Alan advocate or argue against an attempt to limit speech?
Advocate.
Yes, he's a Federalist. Let's do it. Let's limit speech. Yeah, happy face. Or he's for it. Why?
Speech
Yes,
can
but why? What were the arguments being made
Speech
that we need to limit speech?
Speech can be really dangerous.
Yes, speech can be dangerous. Threat to order. It can lead to violence. It can lead to revolution. Over there in France, they've just overthrown a monarchy that has been in place for hundreds of years. The United States presidency at the time this law was passed was about 10 years old. There have already been attempts to overthrow the state of Massachusetts. Bacon's Rebellion? No, not Bacon's Rebellion. She's Rebellion. Thank you. There's even been an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government. The Whiskey Rebellion. So the Federalists say, look, we cannot allow dangerous speech. Not all speech, dangerous speech. Okay? So that's the reason. Okay? Synthesis. So this is sort of your homework, and that is to find another example, another time when the U.S. government limited speech. And I can help you a little bit here. They did find a war, you'll find a government attempt to limit speech. Happened during the Civil War, happened during World War I, happened during World War II. In fact, I do believe that in a couple of those cases, the law passed during the war was called the Sedition Act of a different year. So this original Sedition Act was the Sedition Act of 1790, whatever, 93. I think there's a Sedition Act of 1917. I'm fairly sure of it. Sorry? 1918? There's a Sedition Act of 1918. I do think there's a Sedition Act during World War II. During Vietnam, people who burned their draft cards, because there was a draft during the Vietnam War, they burned them. These college students burned them as a form of speech. They were arrested. Okay? So all sorts of examples of attempts to limit speech. Okay? We've sort of answered the document question. Those of you who read document 3, what is his argument? Why is this a good idea?
Saying because the revolution in France is really, really bad for people and people that get their heads cut off, and we're still developing as a nation, and we can't have that happening. We've only been around for a couple years.
Very good. Did you get that? Right. The argument that Mr. Allen is making is the same thing that we said over here for why. So in a way, why and document evidence are sort of the same thing. I'm not even sure why I created a column called document evidence. I mean, it's the same as why. If you were quoting, then what I'd have you do is write the first and last word of directly quoting. But you're, of course, not quoting because, as you know, you don't quote in Blue Book essays. Don't quote in Blue Book essays, which, by the way, counts if you write the same words but you don't have a quotation mark. You're still quoting! Stop it!
You're just plagiarizing.
Okay. Any questions there? Okay, so now let's try document farm. Okay, so you're starting over again. Here we go. Once we go through this document, I'm done talking, which I'm sure makes all of us happy. Okay, which document are we talking?
4.
4. Who's our speaker?
George Hay.
George Hay. who wrote under the secret identity of Hortensius. So George Hay published this writing in newspapers, but he didn't want anyone to know who he was. So he has a pseudonym, right? Somebody was just doing that. Does anyone recognize the name Mitt Romney?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney's a senator from Utah. And he secretly was writing critical articles about President Trump. He's a fellow Republican. So he did it under a fake name. And some reporter sort of figured it out and then asked him, "Are you this guy?" And Romney said, "Yep, that's me." So this is actually fairly common to write under a secret name so that no one knows who you are, so you can kind of share what you know. Okay. Who is this guy? Who is George Hay? Does it say? Who is George Hay?
Wouldn't he be Democratic Republican if he's?
Well, he's definitely a Democratic Republican, which is good enough. That's fine. Democratic Republican. Yeah. The issue is the same. A government attempts to limit speech. Let's get document evidence for now. The historical example is the same. It's still about the Sedition Act. Only it's the Democratic Republican perspective of the Sedition Act.
Please excuse the announcement. If anybody is interested in Century College, there is a rep here at this time. Thank you.
How many of you were in the debate yesterday where Ethan was the main speaker for that team? What did Ethan say, which I thought was brilliant, about, you know, this team up here said, look what's happening in France. You have people losing their heads. And so the Federalists were justified in passing the Sedition Act to prevent what happened in France from happening here. And then Ethan got up and said, yeah, but what do you say? Yeah. Yeah, very good, right? In France, there's no way to get rid of the king. He's there. That's it. But in the US, we already have a mechanism for getting rid of leaders. They're called elections. That's how you get rid of a leader. You don't need to violently overthrow anybody like they have to do in France if they don't like their leader, which I thought was brilliant. So that could be your response, you know, your analysis. If you happen to believe that the Sedition Act was no good, you could make the same argument that Ethan made yesterday. I thought it was pretty argument. Okay, so obviously this would be sad face, right? No good. Law's no good. Why? Which is the same as document evidence, right? Those of you who read it, what are his arguments? What's wrong with this Sedition Act? What does document 4 say? Who had document 4?
Free speech can't be free speech.
Okay, violates the First Amendment. Free speech. You can't have kind of free speech. He calls it freedom of the press in there, right? You know, I haven't read this document in a while. Who actually did read this document? You can admit it. Okay. So when Ethan came up with that argument, was it based on the document, or was that just him on his own? There's nothing in here about elections. Okay, so I still think you can use that argument, but what is that argument? What is that? Where you're saying, yeah, but I think it's wrong. It's analysis. That's what analysis is. You're throwing your 2 cents in. Okay, and I'm giving you all permission if you want. Use it. Okay, so violates freedom of the press, First Amendment, which is document evidence is the lie. Right? So here's your homework again. Can you find examples where people voiced their opinion and it was an unpopular opinion, but damn it, this is America. They have the right to do that. Sorry? Well, DAM dam, right? The wall that prevents the water from flowing. That dam. Dam it. Build a dam.
This recording's already getting thrown up.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've already blown this. Okay. I mean, there are so many examples
Rosa.
of, well, I don't know about Rosa exercising freedom of speech. I do think Rosa engaged in civil disobedience, but that's a different issue, right? That's for next week. Okay, you need to find examples where free speech was uttered. Someone talky, and it was an unpopular opinion, but we need that. We need that in America. We need that voice. You cannot shut that voice down. Martin Luther King, great example, right? Any person who has the guts to say this is wrong, what we're doing is wrong, of some U.S. policy. How else do you hear the opposition if you don't allow speech? How else do you hear the people that say this is wrong? Okay, so you just need to find an example of exercising speech that happened in America and led to some sort of a policy change or some sort of change. Right? Okay, any questions? Very good. So let's just revisit this. Anyone need a new copy?
What are we looking at?
New copy? Yeah. Okay. This class ends at 9:20, so instead of about 10 minutes. I thought you'd have more than that. So it seems to me like you are now fully armed with the ability to give this a shot. A 2-paragraph mini essay on just the issue that we covered today, which is attempts to limit speech, right? You should be able, just look this over, right? What in there are you unable to do? This is where you'd, right? So let's just say I agree with the Democratic Republican point of view, okay? So I believe that any attempt to limit speech is wrong. My paragraph number 1, if I'm following this, you're free to switch the order, by the way, but let's just say you're going to follow this order. My paragraph number 1 would go something like this. All right, so the first thing I need to do is state the side I agree with. I would say something like this. Democratic Republicans correctly opposed any government attempt to limit speech. Bam, there's my claim. And now what do? I need document evidence. This is where I'm going to refer to Hortensius and his argument. This was clearly argued by a man by the name of George Hay, a Democratic Republican who argued that any attempt to limit speech violated the freedom of the press guarantee that exists in the First Amendment of the Constitution. There's my document evidence. Bam, done. Okay, now what? I need evidence. Now I'm talking about the Sedition Act and what was wrong with the Sedition Act, according to this person. Right? What's wrong with it? Okay, there, and then I can synthesize. I can say this is similar to Vietnam protesters who burned their draft cards, but they had the right to do so because they felt that American participation in the Vietnam War was wrong, and that the draft was unjustifiable. And by the way, to support that, by the way, did you know that all people who burned their draft cards were all pardoned? They were all pardoned by Jimmy Carter when he was president, because he said it was a divisive time. So in a way, you have history vindicating the actions of those people. Okay, so that would be the end of paragraph number 1, the side I agree with. Now what I need to do is admit the validity of the other side and then refute it. First, you got to prove it, then you refute it. Many of you missed that on your first Blue Book essay. You stated the historian you disagreed with and then immediately disproved. First prove, then disprove. Okay? You got to say that this has some merit, but ultimately it's wrong. Okay, so this would be the side that says Federalists wrongly supported an attempt to limit speech. There's my claim. And then there's where I refer to the Federalist guy. Was it John Allen?
Mhm.
Yep. And what he said and why the Sedition Act was seen as necessary. That's where you can refer to the French Revolution that you wrote right there. Okay. And say this might appear to have some validity, but it's wrong. And why is it wrong? And now you need to find another historical example, which shows this is wrong. And so I'm going to give you sort of something you should investigate. Does anyone happen to know this? How many people were arrested for violating the Sedition Act? Was anyone arrested for violating the Sedition Act? Yes, many were. Something like 70 newspaper writers were arrested for violating the Sedition Act. And you could use that as saying, but they were just doing their job. They happened to be Democratic, Republican leaning newspapers, and the Federalists were using this law as a weapon to target political opponents. And that ain't right. Don't use the word hate. Okay. Any questions? Now, does anyone want this? Maybe not yet, right? Again, what I'm assigning you is not going to be counting for points. I'm not even going to check it. When is a fair due date for this 2-paragraph masterpiece? When would you think you should be done with it so that you can show somebody and you can read each other's and help each other write a kick butt essay? When is it? Wednesday.
Friday.
Let's go with Wednesday. By Wednesday, have a good faith attempt at 2 paragraphs about the Sedition Act. Okay. This? Like this piece of paper? Oh, no. That's adorable. No, I'm probably going to allow you to use this whole thing, which has some space. Hey, there's some space.
Wait, for our exam?
We're gonna write really small.
Oh, Carl, you have my essay corrected?
I think so.
Can I see it?